The Obama Will Save Us by Gerald Frost. Jacket description. This is a story about destroying the world and then saving it. A story about global warming and its consequences. A story about spaceships and relationships and how to build them. About programmer-level humor, holograms, death rays, and hobbits. About sword fights and the pumping iron project, spiders and mirrors. About lies no one sees and dedication when no one is watching. About building castles in the air and living in them and how and why. Making alcohol, toasting, drinking, and cleaning stinking septic sludge. Of engineering and prophecy, poetry, and about gardening, about math, footnotes, and the devil in the details. Slime and salvation, about lighting up a lady's eyes when she gets a big surprise. If this story had a cute fluffy pet, why, it would have everything. Footnote number 1. "I'm not a stupid fluffy pet," says Betty, the station computer. She has an IQ over 4 digits. You'll not win the argument. Alas, the version with everything was 50,000 pages long. This version has been severely abridged. The good parts version. Enjoy. Forward. Barack Obama, the 44th President of the United States. In all caps, it is the acronym for the Orbital Big-Ass Mirror Array, the photon deflectors that now help regulate our planet's temperature. If global warming hadn't been stopped, the South Polar ice cap would have melted and sea level gone up by 216 feet. Footnote 2. That's from National Geographic, September 2013. Mind you, scientists projected it would have taken over 5,000 years to melt all that ice. Footnote 3. Except for Al Gore, Nobel Prize-winning climate change scientist, who said in his 2007 speech, "The Earth has a fever," that the polar ice could be gone by as soon as 2014. Clearly ahead of his time, which is why he got a Nobel Prize, and also why he's president of the Premature Ejaculators Totally Anonymous. PETA. Since he was the president who signed the legislation that started the program, his name is, as it were, on the building. Footnote 4. Had the project been initiated earlier, it might have been called the Big Upstairs Sun Hat, which is dumb. And if it was later, it would no doubt have been called MAGA. Or it could have been called the Climate Initiative Towards Normalcy. And who'd trust that? Okay, the story starts. In a station in the sky, there lived an engineer. Not a nasty, damp station, dirty, filled with cigarette butts and oozy smell. Nor yet a dry, bare, dusty station with no one in it and nothing to eat. An engineer lived in this station, and he made it comfortable. The station had a perfectly round door for a porthole, painted green, with a shiny brass target point in the exact middle. The door opened into a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel without smoke, and with walls, which were also the floors, paneled and carpeted and illuminated, with lots of holding-on points for moving around and tying things off in zero gravity, for this engineer was very fond of visitors, infrequent though they were. The central hall went straight through the axis of the station and out the other side, where there was another large green door, and many little round doors opened out of the hall, first on one side and then on the other. And because this hall was in zero gravity, even up and down, well, from a practical standpoint, all the doors opened down. As mentioned, the station spun around the axis that the central hall followed. Most of the little doors opened onto a multitude of storage rooms snuggled next to the zero-gravity hall, as a lack of weight makes it easier to transfer cargo. But further out, where station rotation makes an imitation of gravity, important because it does nice things like keeping tea in pots and saucers on tables, there were kitchens and dining rooms and bathrooms and bedrooms and pantries and other specialized work areas. Most of the best rooms were on that outer ring, including gardens with windows, deep-set round windows that looked out at mirrors that pointed at the sun. Footnote 5. The light path is much more complicated than a simple one-mirror bounce. Allow this to pass for a poetic introduction. We'll be getting back to it. Sometimes, when you looked out diagonally through one of the windows, you could catch a glimpse of the Earth 1,000 miles below. Footnote 6. 1,000 miles above the Earth and doing 12 laps around the Earth each day, casting 5 minutes of shade in each lap. In total, each Obama casts an hour's shade on the Earth every day, and it's likewise in the Earth's shadow an hour per day. From the station, the shadow is the size of a thumb held at arm's length. As seen from Earth, each Obama passing is a 10-second eclipse. As ground control correctly cautions, never look directly at the sun. A pinhole and a piece of aluminum foil casts enough light on a white sheet of paper a foot away to safely observe an Obama passing in front of the sun. Looking straight out through the window meant that you were looking at a mirror that pointed at the sun, and you only had to do that once to learn that it was not a bright idea. This engineer was very intelligent, and his name is Brian. Brian had lived in the station for 2 years, and ground control considered him very respectable, and not only because he was smart, but also because he never had any adventures or did anything unexpected. You could tell what Brian would say on any question without the bother of asking him. This is a story of how Brian had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost ground control's respect, but he gained, well, you will see whether he gained anything in the end. The station's computer that the engineer lived with was named Betty. What kind of engineer? I suppose engineers need some description nowadays, since they have become rare and shy of the big lunks, as they call us. They are, or were, an intelligent people, about twice as intelligent as normal people are, and far smarter than the people who write science fiction novels. Engineers shave their beards. There is little or no magic about them, except the ordinary, everyday sort, which helps them to disappear quickly and quietly, and blend in when a big lunk like you or me comes blundering along, making noise like elephants, which they can hear a mile off. Engineers are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress with pocket protectors in which they carry a multitude of writing tools and electromechanical diagnostic aids. They have long, clever fingers, good-natured faces, and they laugh deep, fruity laughs, especially after dinner, which they have twice a day if they can get it, and they have furry feet upon which they never wear... "Wait a minute," interrupted Brian, looking at the wiggling toes upon his bare feet, which, while they had a couple of widely spaced hairs, were nothing like what you'd call furry. Okay, so the Hobbit intro isn't going to work. But since you've gotten this far, let me try again. Footnote 7. This is a very good visual intro to the station. It works even better if you imagine Morgan Freeman as the narrator. But then, that would make anything sound good. Story restarts. In the arena, the roar of the crowd ignored, Brian swung his heavy sword in 4 well-practiced flourishes, defiantly counting them aloud. Then he called his shots as he slammed them in flash fire and full force into his opponent's shield. 1 from the right, 2 from the left, 3 again from the right, and as Brian called 4, his opponent braced for the strike to come from the left. But instead, Brian's ironclad boot lifted his opponent's shield, and his sword smashed into his opponent's foot. His opponent jerked his foot up, accompanied by an unpracticed oath. Brian leaned in and released his shield, and with his now free shield hand, he reached around the tangled shield with a dagger. The dagger tore up into the armpit of his already screaming opponent, sinking a deep and messy wound, possibly a death blow. The opponent wouldn't die in real life, of course, but at this point the match would likely be denied the use of his foot and his sword arm for the remainder of the fight. The match computer judges whether hit is debilitating or deadly. The holographic interface makes sure that while you feel the push, there is no puncture. Releasing his dagger, abandoning it in his opponent's body, Brian retrieved his shield from its pinned position between the two fighters. As the holographic warrior crumbled to his knees on the ground in front of him, Brian backed up and re-established standard defensive form. His sword remained pointed at the fallen fighter on the floor, and he circled slowly. You never know. Sometimes they get back up. The crowd urged him to press his advantage, but Brian switched from aggression to caution for good reasons. In part, it was to recover from his burst of exertion, and in part to see if he'd already won. Since in real life, Brian was himself fighting at 1/4 of the Earth's gravity, he had effectively infinite carry capacity. However, exertion always took its toll. The heat of movement would be shed more slowly through his thicker armor, and the moisture he lost by sweating would have to be replaced, preferably accompanied by boisterous toasts. Footnote 8. For instance, the standard drinking toast is, "The water shed through sweating must be replaced by copious drinking." And the response is, "This toast cannot be honored with merely a sip. Much must pass the lip." Gulp, gulp, gulp. His reflexes were the same as any other human, but his quirky advantage always helped him up the iWarrior chart of ratings. Footnote 9. Do not confuse iWarrior with iWarriors. The first, without the S, is the holographic competition. The later, with the S, belonging to an organization that gives computers and iPads to soldiers that have lost limbs in battle. Okay? He had not added to his fighter profile that he was the lone engineer supporting an Obama station, and no one yet had figured out how he had more gear than they could imagine carrying, or why he could spend so much time playing an online hologame. Most people either had time to play, but no money for bandwidth, or plenty of money and no time. Brian had both because he was, in effect, a backup plan. That Brian had both time and bandwidth was of little consequence. He was the only person on a pair of space stations. The second station was the Habitat, currently inhabited only by he himself, for he was both the entire crew and the only passenger. The Habitat spun 3 times per minute. Footnote 10. The math for 3 times per minute is included in the math notes. 4 words of text in the story cost me 5 days of reviewing the physics. Even the math in the math notes, it only shows up as a long paragraph. Knowledge of rotational dynamics has a half-life of about 2 years. The Habitat spun 3 times per minute to provide artificial gravity for its human inhabitant, and not for comfort's sake alone. For almost everything is harder in zero gravity. Everything from cooking food to taking a shower. Footnote 11. Carelessly opening a bottle of headache pills in zero gravity is the opening move for a 10-minute chore in addition to the headache you've already got. Pill spill. Hopefully you'll only do it once. But some things were better in reduced gravity. The holographic studios happened to be located on the station's quarter gravity level, and that had given Brian an unexpected bonus, an advantage when fighting. Nowhere in the rules did it say that the contestants had to fight under the same gravitational conditions, or if they weren't fighting at the same level of gravity, that they had to confess to having this advantage. The primary station was the Obama itself, the mirror array that cast its shadow on the Earth for an hour a day. Those mirrors were the reason Brian was here. Everything else was secondary. The mirror station's important feature starts with a metal ring 5 miles across, strung with spider wire, footnote 12. Spider wire is neither made from the silk spun by spiders, nor is it made from metal like wire. It is made chemically from petroleum. The process produces long polymer chains that are as strong as spider silk, which are then woven into the thread which is spooled. The primary advantage is that by weight, it is 20 times stronger than steel, and the weight on a space station is an important factor. The other advantage is one does not have to milk 1 million spiders. Eventually, you'd get a cumulative case of the willies. Strung with spider wire like a dream catcher, and bejeweled with 10,000 mirrors. Footnote 13. There are 10,254,385 mirrors, more or less, but the big round number looks better in print. Each of these bright jewels is a parabolic mirror 2 meters across, footnote 14. This is about as large as a king-size bed, but with a mass of only 265 grams. Footnote 15. I have been accurate and honest about the numbers in this story. This is not a mere story, it's a mirror story in which I try to reflect the truth. Many science fiction stories are science fantasy, making up physics that doesn't exist. This is a fictional story based upon extrapolation of current science, a story of what could actually be made. I've even included a section on math notes. Most people aren't going to get very far into the math, and that's okay. Most people aren't going to change the world either. Consider yourself challenged. A sheet of plastic wrap 1/1000th of an inch thick, coated with silver, footnote 16. The reflecting surface is actually aluminum rather than silver. In olden days, it was actual silver, the metal used for making jewelry and killing vampires. Nowadays, the reflecting metal is aluminum because it resists oxidation better, it's cheaper, and yet it's still called silver. This is why you cannot use a modern mirror to kill a vampire. Go figure. And sapphire, footnote 17. Sapphire is a jewel with a chemical composition of Al2O3, 2 aluminum atoms, and 3 oxygen atoms. The oxide of aluminum is very hard and very clear. It allows light to pass through and protects the pure aluminum reflecting surface from oxidation. Ionized atoms boil off the sun, and if they happen to hit the shiny metal, it would tarnish instantly. The crystalline surface, however, resists such degradation. It's cheap, and it works. Footnote 18. I have an ounce of man-made sapphire, a cherished 10-cent souvenir from a former job. One of my chores was to use an electron beam hearth in a vacuum chamber, a bell jar, to vapor deposit sapphire on various substrates. This coating technology is not only well known, but it's something with which I have had hands-on experience. And a support loop of 2 millimeter thick wire. A wind on Earth would shred such a thin mirror. Even a breeze would wrap it beyond use. But these mirrors were made in space and safely balanced in the feather-soft free fall of orbit. 70 feet above the primary mirror are the dump mirrors, small movable mirrors which catch the light from the parabolic reflectors below and redirect the light as needed. The dump mirrors had their own ring and supporting array of spider wires, and each dump mirror was dedicated to one and only one of the parabolic mirrors below. The 2 huge support rings were matched in size and positioned one above the other, like an engagement ring and a wedding ring on a giant invisible finger. The 2 stations were separated by miles, but attached by spider wires, footnote 19. The tiny wires are there to transfer the lifting force from the mirror array to the habitat. In truth, the force between the 2 components is not that large. The gravitational attraction would pull the 2 stations together, and the extra photons that the mirror throws at the habitat would push it away. The wires have to be there to make sure that the mirror array does not drift away. Without this tension, not even Betty could prevent that drift. Attached by spider wires that ran from the mirror ring to the habitat stabilizer, the non-rotating stirrup-shaped arch that attached near both ends of the habitat's central hull. Supporting the mirror station was the reason Brian was here. The mirror station rotated once a year and remained pointed at the sun. The habitat that Brian lived on, hanging forever in its shadow. The transmission band, which Brian used for games, was a free perk. It was there because of stations. As long as the stations didn't need it, he could use it. And he used it, like all other Obama engineers, to make sure he didn't go hermit mad from isolation. Yes, Brian has duties. Sometimes The chores could be stretched to make up 2 or even 3 hours a day. And sometimes there might be an actual emergency repair for him to perform. Sometimes he needed to fetch a part from storage or use one of the 3D printers to make that part and to use it to replace a failing component. Most often it was a boring maintenance deed, such as physical house cleaning, like riding the scrubbers through the halls. Actually, that was a fun chore. Of course, the crops needed daily tending, though the automatics handled much of the farming, like adding light and water. Once a month, a supply ship would dock. Some had pilots, which Brian enjoyed talking with, and some of the cargo pilots he couldn't get rid of fast enough. Some would swap equipment out of his storage to be used on another Obama, and leave him equipment he had no need of, using his station as a staging area in a globe-circling game of 3-card Monte. And most of them would take on food, water, and fuel, and leave him sewage water. Brian thought his station was getting the low end of that deal, but since he didn't actually own the station, he didn't have any say in the matter. The player behind his holographic opponent had fought with respectable skill, at least until he fell for the clever combo that started this scene. Brian had to work harder than usual to defeat him. Taunts had not stirred his down opponent, other than a few hand gestures which obviously don't count. 15 seconds after his opponent fell to the floor, the game was scored as a victory to Brian. To his opponent, and to the 200 unseen and mostly cheering observers, Brian saluted and exited. Brian's next scheduled match was not for another 6 hours, though it wasn't a league match. He didn't feel like sparring and practice matches at the moment, so Brian removed and stowed his gear. He strolled down to the 1G habitat level to prep for the shuttle that was slowly being hauled in, and which was scheduled to dock in 2 hours. Brian needed to hit the showers. His two-year tour of duty was almost up, and his replacement was on this ship. It wouldn't do to make a foul first impression. Footnote 20. During the scenes, the credits have drifted past. A flyby introduced the linked high-tech Obama and Habitat stations, with a shuttle being slowly hauled into dock like a big fish. Counterpoint to this is Brian fighting in full knight armor. Music with a lot of anticipation plays and introduces the themes for the different areas as they are viewed. Brian's theme is played on panpipes during the Hobbit intro, but on harsh trumpets during the sword battle. Twittering flutes introduce the mirror theme. Earthy baritone riffs and signify the habitat. A galloping trumpet plays the theme for the shuttle. An ominous theme called Sizzle is played when the view includes the sun. The music and the special effects cost me a great deal of money. I feel that the result totally justified the costly investment. Ramp rant. Brian was there to greet Tristan as the green door slowly swung into the zero-gravity hull. You understand why they pay you 10 years' wage for 2 years' work, don't you? Tristan smiled, accepting Brian's outstretched hand and shaking it warmly. Yeah, but 5 stints on this station and the statute of limitations on Earth will have run out, and I'll be going home a very rich man. Both men smiled. No one ever volunteered, or even had the chance to volunteer, for a second tour, and engineers were extensively background checked and psych evaluated. No one with crimes or personality flaws was going to be left alone on an Obama, nor was anyone with medical problems. The nearest ship was thousands of miles away in orbit, or a several-hour emergency flight, most likely a few days. And meet the other member of the crew. Betty, this is Tristan. He'll be staying with you for a few years. Greetings, Tristan, said the sultry voice of the computer with silken overtones. Footnote 21. Betty really is a member of the crew, except for chores that require nimble hands or extreme adaptability during an emergency. She could run the station pretty much by herself. More about Betty later. An exceptionally handsome masculine specimen you are, just as I requested, delightedly examining those gorgeous eyes. You have the same kind of eyes as Keanu Reeves. Footnote 22. This is an actual flirt that was used upon me by an inebriated lady. Betty stole it shamelessly. Oh my, I like her, Tristan said. Hello, Betty. You bet she's checked out your eyes, Brian said. You've been retinal scanned. I've got her personality tweaked as far into the flirty as I could get it to go. Much more tolerable than the aloof mode she had when I got here. And I think I'll stop there. The adventure. Ha! Yeah, it's fun. All right. I'm going to be putting this out in book form, so I might go back and keep reading, but first off, I've got to figure out how to get this to people who will read it. Take care.